Video games based on anime usually go one of two ways. They either try to emulate the anime as closely as possible, beat for beat, or they spin off in their own direction to offer something fresh. It's hard to have it both ways, and Sword Art Online Alicization Lycoris's attempt to pull it off ends so badly it's not worth putting up with to experience the engaging combat or making the long journey to the point where you can actually play co-op. On the one hand, there's a lot of faithful adherence to the source material. Just as in the latest season of the anime, Kirito finds himself trapped in a Matrix-style virtual world known as Underworld with no way out. And many of the show's familiar characters, such as Yu-Gi-Oh, are here in full force and fully playable. The first third or so of this adventure follows the anime storyline, although it unfortunately skips over many significant events and retcons several key plot points along the way that would have helped add necessary context. It feels incomplete. The result is a story that lacks focus and spreads itself too thin. It dives deep into things that don't really need extra focus while glossing over entire arcs of the story in later portions. There's also no option for English voiceover, which is a drag if you prefer dubbed games. And it's kind of shocking how much time you're forced to spend reading through the story in subtitles. It's not uncommon to literally spend 5 minutes on a quest to kill a monster and then spend the next full hour bouncing between long loading screens and 2D character illustrations, talking to each other relentlessly. Character development is great, but loads of tedious dialogue with descriptions of events that happen off screen is just not interesting. When you actually get to play for more than a few minutes, Sword Art Online's combat is engaging. Everything happens in real time with beautiful art and animation, so even though the fiction is set within an MMO, the combat doesn't feel like one. It's much more like a traditional action RPG with fast-paced attacks and flashy combos. Then, during boss battles, combat completely switches to a more tactical 1-versus-1 dueling system, complete with a new parrying mechanic and locked-on camera. That said, it takes close to 10 hours for all the tutorials to roll out on how to chain together special attacks, issue commands to AI party members, and master the various arts and techniques. Until then, the companion AI is nearly useless because they rarely act without being given orders. Having to wait that long before being let loose feels excessive, and it's frustrating to not be able to experiment with companion combos early on. To its credit, Alicization Lycoris absolutely nails the thrill and spectacle of the anime from top to bottom, though with its dazzling effects and superb music. That is, when it's all working well. Drop frames, stuttering, and painfully long load times were common until I lowered my settings quite a bit, something that should not be needed for a PC that's well above the recommended specs. Frustrations don't stop at technical issues either. At one point around halfway through the game, there was a marathon of 2 straight hours of cutscenes and boss fights in which you literally go from boss fight to cutscene to boss fight over and over, without a single save point in between. After dying near the end, I lost 2 hours of progress. That was infuriating. Eventually, if you can stick it out for the first 15 hours, Alicization Lycoris branches off from the anime to tell its own story in the second half. It feels a bit like the Game of Thrones' later seasons, where the developers worked from the same source material but arrived at slightly different conclusions from the anime showrunners. It's definitely stronger than the first half, but it does meander a bit and devolves into an assortment of uninspired side stories in a way. It's kind of like an extended post-game rather than an actual continuation of the main storyline. What's really bizarre is that until you reach this point, you can't customize your character and you can't play online co-op at all. That's likely to put off a lot of people right there, because having to trudge through all of that just to play with others is a bridge too far. Alicization Lycoris feels like an amalgamation of ideas for Sword Art Online games of different genres without much thought given to how they can fit together, and the seams are showing. It definitely had potential, but squandered the majority of it on a lackluster retelling of the anime's latest season that leaves out interesting parts in favor of extended, boring visual novel-style conversations, locking out co-op and a character customization for the first half, and a litany of performance problems. The exciting combat and interesting characters aren't enough to save this action RPG from being just another disappointing footnote in the anime's legacy. For more on Sword Art Online's latest games, check out our review for 2018's Fatal Bullet. And for everything else, stay tuned to IGN.